You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is part one of a two-part episode with Dan Porterfield. This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today, I have the special pleasure of interviewing two people who are really important in my life and in my profession. One is the former president of Franklin and Marshall College, where I attended and have been on the board for, I want to say 32 years. And that's Dan Porterfield, who's now the CEO of the Aspen Institute. And my good friend, Robert Diggs, who is a graduate of Franklin and Marshall. And he's also a board member of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. And Diggs works now in HR consulting. And it's great to have them both with us today. But so I'm here at the Aspen Institute to interview them because Dan has written a new book called Mindset Matters. And it's really kind of a love story between him and Franklin and Marshall College, particularly focused on the many student relationships that he was able to develop while he was the president there, but also the important lessons that he learned about what it takes for us as a country to grow young people into viable and strong leaders in our society, and the role that some of the experiments that we did at Franklin and Marshall during his presidency and how that led to some of the successes that you're going to hear about in this book and that we're going to try to chronicle to some extent, to a small extent in this interview. So let me just welcome Dan and Diggs. We call him Diggs, to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thank you, Art. Great to be here. Great to be with Robert Diggs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Dan, you wrote this book. I know it has been sort of a thing that you wanted to do for a long time since you left Franklin and Marshall. And I guess it just wouldn't go away, this desire that you had to tell the stories of some of the young people that you had the opportunity to teach and mentor and lead in so many different ways. And now we not only see the stories themselves, but we see what they mean. What they mean to higher education, what they mean to how we grow our society, and what it means to launch young people into prosperous lives that can contribute to society. So let me start just by asking you, did it accomplish what you wanted it to?
I hope so. During COVID is when I really focused on writing this book. And the way I did that was to call probably 30 to 40 students, former students like Diggs, and talk with them about the ideas of the book and about a hypothesis I had in some of their cases about their growth journeys. And to ask them, will you think with me about how to express this idea that a great college education can prepare you to believe and know that you can continue to lead your own learning after college. I think that this economy that we're in today, with rapid escalating pace of change, much of it science and tech driven, means that all of us are going to have to drive our own development, professionally and personally. And that those that feel that they have done it and that they know how to do it and they love doing it, they can do it again. Those people that have a growth mindset, I think, are well positioned to be able to thrive in a rapidly changing world. I should say that a growth mindset is an idea developed by Carol Dweck at Stanford, which is that confronted with the new, we can meet the moment and we can grow into the kinds of experience we would like to have for ourselves. The opposite is the fixed mindset, she says, which is that confronted with the new, we say, I'm not good at that. And so we just limit ourselves by our own self-belief about what is possible. And, sometimes people think that talent is inherent and fixed. And if you believe in a growth mindset, you believe that we can develop our talent. It's malleable. We can adjust it. We can grow it. So this book expresses that argument that college is a great setting to activate growth mindsets. And that was one thing I wanted to accomplish, was to make a case for the value proposition of college for these times, for this economy, for the world we live in now. And it's fun doing that, given that there's an awful lot of self-appointed people out there saying that college is just reinforces the status quo in society, or it's all about woke brainwashing, or it's all about paying for the party and letting students run wild with no responsibility. And actually, all those critiques can be addressed, but they aren't the real story, the full story, which is the eminence of individual learning and growth that happens at scale across American higher education. The second thing I wanted to accomplish was to just be able to connect with people in my life who I had a chance to watch, learn, and grow, who I admire, and to do justice to their learning and do justice to the educators that helped them learn by telling stories in a way that would explicate what's really going on when young people develop confidence that they themselves can lead their lives and grow. And so Diggs helped me with this, because we had several interviews where we talked about his experience helping to lead a process where a group of students together wrote the Constitution for the college house they would live in. It was an example of participatory democracy at a really high level. 18, 19, 20-year-olds with a couple mentors who were educators wrote the rules that they would then present to the larger group of several hundred who would live in a college house, for that group to modify, vote, enact, and live by. And I thought that the teamwork that was demonstrated through that experience, the incredible capacity of students from different walks of life, a couple of whom hadn't even started college yet, were going to live in that house, to work together to build a constitution, was one example of how the mindset to work in groups can be fostered in a college environment. And throughout the book, what I ultimately described as the value of growth is expressed, and in fact, I came to understand it better by listening to students as they described how they learned and grew at FNM.
Well, we're going to get into Diggs because he's a unique talent in and of himself.
So I saw that.
We'll talk about that.
I saw that on Thanksgiving of 2010 when I went up to Franklin and Marshall College for the first time. I hadn't started as president. I started on March 1st, 2011. Art was on the search committee, and I asked, would you all mind if I got up there right away? And to meet people, and when you were in that first wave I met, I was like, whoa, the insights, maturity. That's only grown since then.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we'll get into that, but I want to get into you just a bit, Dan. I know you don't like to talk about yourself a lot.
Yeah.
You like to talk about other people.
Yeah, I don't mind a little
bit.
But
I'm gonna talk about you because I met you, as you mentioned. You walked into a room. We were looking for a college president. I was on a search committee. You walked into the room, you sat down at the chair, and you started talking. And about 5 minutes in, I was smiling.
Yeah.
And I believed that we had our president. Yeah. And I think we even made some eye contact. And it was pretty clear that I was actually sitting at the other end of the table.
I remember it vividly.
Yeah. And but there was a reason why. And it had a lot for me to do with your lifelong commitment to learning and your work at Georgetown, actually living in college dorms. Yeah. Helping talk about. I'm getting into your story. You tell your own story.
Well, so I grew up with a single mom who had grown up in foster care.
Yeah.
Then went to college in her 30s while working and to provide for me and my sister, and whose desire for more education only increased with every degree she earned. She ended up having a PhD and becoming a college professor and writing books about the history of women in the American West. There's a lot to say about Ann Butler's life story. But that was how I first got exposed to this idea that through learning, we can tap the deepest reservoirs of our capacity and that we can know who we are. And so when I was in high school, I coached a number of basketball teams that were teams with both white and black students that played in either all white or all black leagues.
Wow.
Learned a lot from that. When I was in college, I worked with court supervised youth and created some programs that are still around today at Georgetown, 45 years later, that were about involving college students in the lives of younger people who have a lot of talent and opportunity, but need to focus. I worked with immigrant families. I taught in prisons, and in all those different settings, before I ever got near being a college professor, I just saw the beauty and the power of the individual human coming into the fullness of their potential and believing in themselves and feeling believed in. And so when I had to choose whether to become a lawyer and maybe a crusading public defender or a judge or run for office or work as an educator, really my whole life, to build collaboration and community, that was what called me. That was what spoke to who I was. Yeah. And my experiences at Georgetown as a faculty member and a faculty in residence and the head of strategy for Georgetown for a while gave me this extra feeling that you could both be student focused and immersed and engaged in student learning and develop an institution. That those two things weren't two separate jobs, but one, two sides of a coin. Yeah. Does an institution respond to the eminence of individual need? And at the same time, does it seek to develop itself to be of greater value and service for the world coming into being? And Franklin and Marshall was my opportunity after Georgetown and my first opportunity as CEO to work that way, to through my own philosophy of leadership, engage people at the level of what they want to accomplish, help them be their best, and at the same time, with them, help the institution create its destiny. Yeah. And so that's sort of why when I walked onto FNM's campus in November of 2010 as the president-elect, I wanted to meet students right away and see how they saw their learning experience. In fact, the New Yorkers like Diggs, I remember asking a group I gathered up, you all are from a city that's like got, the concrete jungle where dreams are made of. You're out here in the land of the whoopie pie. It's all green. What, why?
Yeah.
And I might have asked you that. And I remember the answer. I thought they were going to say, I don't know, something about, New York is the supreme place. And I'm holding my breath, but it was the opposite. Right. They said, I can really focus on development here. There's less stress than in my neighborhood at home. I'm able to go deep. I love this. And so that was the beginning of my, if you will, journey of learning about what the students of Franklin and Marshall College so valued about that place. Yeah. And I learned to value F&M through their experience, not because I came in and told them what they should want to value.
Well, I have to say that we were, zeroed in on talent when you got there. That was a whole, I think, center of your presidency is how we identify and grow and attract talent to Franklin and Marshall. And Diggs, you were one of those people that we were able to attract. Mm-hmm. And I remember meeting you for the first time. I was actually on campus to rename the basketball court that I played on as a student. We renamed it to Robinson Court after Coach Glenn Robinson, who is the winningest basketball coach in the history of Division III and probably the fourth all-time winningest coach in the history of college basketball. Exactly. At any division. So had the great honor to play for Glenn, but I was there to make some remarks about the renaming of that court. Mm-hmm. And before the game began, Diggs comes up to me out of nowhere. I'm like, who is this kid? He says, I want you to do an interview. Yep. And he takes me up into the booth and we're doing this interview. And it's like, wow, I mean, this guy could be like an interviewee for a major broadcast network or something. And he's a college student. And so I was like really blown away by that. And then, of course, throughout the next couple of years on campus, I got to know him a little bit more. But we could clearly see in you the talent and the potential that you had. And I was really happy the first opportunity I got to bring Diggs into our organization as a board member because he brings so much there too. But talk about your journey to Franklin and Marshall, if you don't mind. I know you had a really, I think, and to some degree privileged high school education.
Yep.
But talk about your journey to F&M.
Yeah. So for me, the journey, I sort of go back to middle school, because without my middle school, I would have gone to prep for prep. Without prep for prep, I wouldn't have gotten to Lawrenceville. Without Lawrenceville, I wouldn't have gotten to F&M. Actually, even further back, actually goes back to elementary school, because my acceptance letter to my middle school actually got stuck to some mail that went to Time Out New York somehow. Because in New York City public schools, you either have your dedicated middle school that you would go to. I ended up applying for a magnet school, and we didn't get the letter, so we assumed that I didn't get into the middle school I wanted to go to. So we're preparing to go to the regular school, I think it's MS 113, and out of the blue we get this envelope from Time Out New York that has a ripped up letter enclosed in it that says, "We believe this is for you." It was my acceptance letter to the Brooklyn School for Collaborative Studies, where those, not that I didn't have great teachers before in my elementary school, but my middle school teachers really were probably the first to truly identify that that I could be something more, which, I was just prepared to go through a specialized high school exam in New York and see if I could get into one of those high schools. But they identified that perhaps going through something like Prep for Prep, which in 2 tracks prepares students of color in New York, but New York and the general surrounding area, to either go to a private day school in New York or a boarding school in the Northeast. And I was at the age where they were preparing for boarding school. So it was my teachers that identified that might make sense. So they nominated me. I got in after 14 months of additional study on top of regular schooling. Ended up getting to go to Lawrenceville, which is a boarding school just south of Princeton. And Lawrenceville helped me recognize that I didn't want to be a number in my college experience. So that my answer to your question about why Lancaster, why Franklin and Marshall, I'm pretty sure I referenced the fact that even though I was coming out of, born and raised in Brooklyn, but I spent the last 4 years in a privileged setting in Central or South Jersey, depending on which side of the line you're from, there still was a drive for me to want to be somewhere where I mattered. I didn't want to be a number. I didn't want to go to a state school. And no offense to state schools, I just knew for me, I wanted to matter and not just be a number on a sheet.
Yeah. Well, you were definitely more than a number on a sheet. Dan will attest to your incredible ability to bring people together and to connect folk. You seem to know everyone. There's always someone. I could tell special stories about how he's connected us to people that has really helped our organization. I think of our board member, Elizabeth Monk, and how he just happened to run into this person in a drugstore and found out that she was someone that we could really use, and met her on a plane, all kinds of things we could talk to about him. But his ability to see connections and relationships, I hope, was forged to some extent by your education at Franklin and Marshall, and maybe even this experience that you talk about in the book, Dan.
Well, there's a couple things to say. One is that each educational environment needs to attend to what kind of student with what kind of values might end up there. And a lot of times schools just blanketly recruit rather than focusing a bit. So we did do some brand research when I started, and we understood from that there was essentially a triangle of values that students would be attracted to, and where F&M would be the answer to what they're looking for. And not everything, of course.
That's right.
And that triangle was just like Dig said, they want to have an individual experience, be a named person, a human, not a number, be able to grow as they go. Secondly, to be part of a community, to value being in community, which again, he was doing that every second of his 4 years. And the third was to be at a place that had academic seriousness. You would not go to F&M if you didn't want academic seriousness, because it would be a somewhat unhappy experience.
Sure.
The research we did said that if you looked at top students around the country from a variety of demographics, that not every student wanted that triangle. Some wanted big school. Some wanted to go to football games and cheer and yell. Some wanted to go where their parents had gone. Some cared about being at a city or a school connected to graduate schools. can't talk people out of what they think they know, what they want, but you can find the ones that say signals are being sent, highlight those signals. Yeah. And we found that there was a big percentage, at least 20% of very high talent 16-year-olds that we surveyed through the College Board that wanted this triangle. And so one key was to recruit students now from the full American mosaic that wanted that. Yeah. The second thing is you applied with your question, what is talent? And we were willing to shake it up a bit and try out, based on assessment, some even more particular qualities of talent that we found were predictive of success in this ecosystem. Yeah. And so without a long explication, I'll say fast, one of them was curiosity. Would a student be willing to take classes and engage in experiences they hadn't had before? Yeah. A second quality of talent was resilience. Could they handle hard curriculum where you don't get A's all the time? Would they be able to deal with the ups and downs of college life, the moments of loneliness, the feelings of frustration, the confusion that all 18 to 22-year-olds experience? Would they handle that with maturity, and they have a record of doing that in the past? Yeah. A third critical one was, do they have a record, and he just described it without knowing he said it, before F&M, of saying yes to opportunity. Saying, I want opportunity. I'll sacrifice for opportunity. Yeah. Even if they come from a background where there's not opportunity raining down on them from the sky. Right? In fact, they're willing to be creative with their families and look for opportunity. Absolutely. That is talent. Yeah. Especially for a place like Franklin and Marshall, where if people aren't active and involved students, the place gets flat. Yeah. And then the fourth quality of talent we sort of added into the mix was, do they have a vision of the value of education? Are they willing to work for it and sacrifice it because they know what they're going to go pursue? Yeah. And you might say, is that talent? Absolutely. Yeah. When you recruit for jobs, when you recruit for the military, you want people that want the thing that's in front of them, that value it and will sacrifice for it. So we found, if you define talent that way, and value also students having good grades in the college prep curriculum, which is part of, again, pursuing opportunity, whatever amount you may have, which he did at Lawrenceville, those qualities are equally represented across the American mosaic. They may even be overrepresented in first-gen students, first in their family to go to college. Yeah. Because, again, curiosity, resilience, saying yes to opportunity proactively, and believing in the value of education. Yeah. Those things are predictive of success in F&M. Yeah. So when we tripled our financial aid budget, and tripled our outreach, if you will, and everything kind of doubled or tripled, first-gen students, immigrant students, rural white students, low-income students, African-American students, Latino students, everything doubled or tripled. Yeah. The school became even more stocked with talent. And that meant that they were all influencing each other in ways that you can't engineer. Yeah. You just build when you create a beautiful ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, this is the Heart of Giving podcast, and I'm Art Taylor. And you have heard an amazing series of stories, I'll say. I hope you get the book, Mindset Matters. And for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, this is a weekly show. Every Tuesday, we have a new episode. I hope you will subscribe to the show. You can see our YouTube version of it, which is obviously in video, but there's also an audio version that you can get on all major podcast platforms. Please subscribe and stay in touch. Thanks for joining. We'll be releasing the second part next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.